Okay. So, hello, everyone. Good to see everybody's faces here. I can't see my own, so I don't know. It's kind of strange. If I have something in my teeth or, I don't know, on my face, you can let me know. So, we wanted to talk with you guys about writing. We have a lot of support in the classroom from parents, for writing, and we just want to show you a little bit about how we work with students. And then I know a lot of you are working with your writers at home. So kids start with that. The first writing stage is really that babbling, and they're storytellers from the beginning. And you know, kids, all their development progresses in natural stages. And so just like we don't expect a baby to walk, you know, they go through their process of rolling over and then crawling. It's all progression. Their writing thought of in a similar way. And what we try to focus on here is what they can do. We really set those milestones. We get so excited when babies babble and they make eye contact and make those first sounds, and we give them encouraging feedback, and we're excited at all those little steps. So I like to think of writing as a similar progression. We really want to support them. You know, those first scribbles, that's a stage of writing. And they progress more to symbolic writing. So Jay, if you could pull up that first slide.
Yeah, hold on, okay.
Yeah. So before this stage here, we have everything that's pre-literate. When they're doing those babblings, they're scribbling on paper. And then they really get more into this emergent state of writing. And they're using a lot of different letters. So, you know, anything they're familiar with, it usually starts with letters in their name. But as you can see, there's no spacing. A lot of it is a random order. It's all one long string of words. They even have a letter in here. So for those early stages, we always want to make sure children have access to crayons, pencils, markers, different kinds of paper. And in that pre-literate stage, what we also like to see them have is it's really a partnership with parents and caretakers. And some of you have come from the preschool next door, and you know that they record their stories. So someone will walk around with a clipboard and say, tell me your story. And it's important if you can do that with those pre-literate writers at home as well. How does your story start? And when they sit down and they can tell you a story, you know, about something they saw or a place that they went or something that's going on with their siblings, they really use, a lot of them, even as very young children, will use rich vocabulary, and they're really enthusiastic. And it's important to write those stories down. And starting that at such a young age, they start to see themselves as storytellers. They start to develop their writer's voice even before they can form a single letter. So what we're seeing is the emergent stage, the random order, and then they move into this longer transitional stage. And so this is early transition. And you can see that they, a lot of them have, so it says, I almost, and it's interesting to look at what sounds they hear. It starts by them usually being able to get that first sound, and then they move into the final. So I almost got. And some words are just represented by one letter, the initial sound. Stuck by lightning. That's a really long word. It's interesting that they were able to get two letters. Riding my bike. And then look at yesterday. It's just represented by a single sound. And then they move into transitional 2. And here we see, so the dog's sled ran into a polar bear. They're still writing it as one long sentence, but they do have more initial and final sounds. It looks like the word ran into a polar bear. So we're starting to see vowels in there. And if they don't know patterns, they do more of that invented spelling. And that's a really important part of writing development. And you can see that the skills that they're getting. So it starts with complete invented spelling, and then they are using different word patterns that they're familiar with. And can you move into that third one? So transitional, here we have more conventional spelling, spacing. Their punctuation isn't solid yet, but you can see that they have some experience with sight words and of, and then they is still very phonetic. And then made is interesting because they have that E at the end. So it's clear that this child has some experience with writing patterns and word study. And then also in this transitional stage, it's fun to work with them because if you teach them one thing, like if you have a focus on periods one day, then in their next piece of writing, you see periods all over the place. It's like they have to overdo it before they're able to finesse it and get it just right. Capitals are another interesting one. I see a lot of kids, they start every line with a capital. So they may not be done with their sentence, but they just know that a capital has to be in there when you start something. So that stage is kind of like a using but confusing. They're trying it, they're practicing it. And it reminds me of those young children next door at the preschool where they have to use too much of something, too much paint, too much glitter, before they can really find that balance and figure out how to use it correctly. So this transitional stage, they're really able to reproduce numbers, names, and a lot of those sight words that they see so often. I wanted to talk a little bit about how to support writers. When I see parents working with students sometimes on campus, a student will ask, how do I spell this word? And parents kind of get this terrified look and they look around at us and they're trying to figure out what we want them to do. Do I give it to them? Do I have them sound it out? And then some students can be really, really persistent. They want you to spell it for them. When you think about writing, it's such a risk. You know, you have to, you're not only putting your feelings, emotions, thought out there, but we can often be very critical of spelling, even as an adult. You know, if we see somebody post something on Facebook and there's a misspelling, like think about all the judgment that goes along with that. So for these young children to put themselves out there, it's difficult. So we are asking them to take that risk and sound out words. We don't ever spell something for a child. And so it's using tools to help them. So there is sounding it out. But what I like to do so often is I ask them how many sounds do they hear? So if we're looking at a word like, let me take one out of a bunch, bunch. So you're counting the syllables, and then I'll often draw a line for them, and then they fill that line with the syllables. Or I'm sorry, with the sounds that they hear. So that's a way you can really help them. A lot of children will ask if their writing is correct. Did I spell that right? They really want to know. And what I say is that's phonetically I really understand what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense to me. You have sounded that out. You're relying on phonetics. And then you can let them know that there's a different way to spell the more standard form. And there are patterns in writing. But like we do when we're editing with children, we never want to focus on, we don't want to overwhelm them. We really want to value their writing, and correctness isn't the most important thing. We want to know what their thoughts are. Are they able to express their thoughts? Can we read what they're writing? And really celebrate that. And then after they've got their piece of writing done, then we usually go back and look at spellings or patterns that we think they might know and give them exposure that way. But for the most part, those early first drafts are just to get their thoughts down on paper and see what they're trying to say. We also, to support those transitional writers, I have them read what they wrote. So that's always my first step. If they come hand me a piece of paper and say, can you look at this, or am I done? Then I will have them read it to me. And the reason for that is I don't want to make a wrong assumption on what they've spelled. It just, they're all, again, it's that risk in writing can be so challenging. So if I misinterpret what they wrote, I just want to support them, and I want them to feel confident. So have them read it to me, and then we go back and see what we can work on. And with those young writers, it's usually not a focus on those more complex patterns. It's what you hear at the beginning would be a good way to start, because those writers often don't have experience with syllables. And then if they do write down one letter to represent a word, you can always say, do you hear any other sounds? And then what letters do you think make that sound? So it's always taking a step back and just supporting them and trying to pull from their knowledge to get closer to that more conventional spelling. Okay, Jay, is there another slide? Okay, so we wanted to show you how this is a book that was recently written by a student, and Mary Jo wanted to go over how we edit with them, what that process looks like.
Hi, Kristen.
Hello.
So here's Madeline's piece that she wrote at the beginning of this year. And what I enjoy so much about the writer's workshop is here's the richness right now. And each individual's child is so different. So just as Kristen said, we're first celebrating their writer's voice. And there is such a focus that we put on conventions at a cost to that voice of the writer. What we celebrate first is that they all have a story to tell. So just as Kristen said, she has completed this story. Then she will come to the teacher for editing. We sit down and the student reads their story as it is. Because our first focus is just on what is it, what's your voice, what are you trying to tell us? And then we'll go back to the very beginning and start look at editing. And editing is so critical that you know the individual child. Each child will be a different approach that we take in editing. And just even if you didn't know a child, when you look at this piece of writing, they are revealing so much to you about what their understanding is with conventions, what are the spelling patterns that they already know. And what we'll notice in the editing process is just what you would find out with your own writing. We sometimes write so fast, our thoughts are way ahead of whatever word we're recording at the time. And so you'll see that sometimes there's just omissions or using the wrong form of the word, which this will catch on their own now when they go back to read. And many of this that she already caught when she did her first reading. So you can tell here that is that capitalization. And as Kristen said, once they start learning some conventions, you'll see the overuse of it. Apostrophes are a great one. Where all of a sudden, once they start learning apostrophes, you don't see it in this piece, but you'll see it everywhere. Anytime there's an S, children will start putting in apostrophes once they know about apostrophes. So this is about a wild dog. It is not the word doll as in a play doll. It's actually a doll. So when we go through it, here you can see she is doing spacing between words. She's using uppercase. She's using a lot of lowercase letters, which is a whole new level of writing. Children begin with their uppercase, and now she's beginning to incorporate lowercase letters. On this piece of writing, we are looking at the double O's, just as Kristen was mentioning. It's the consonants we see and ending, and those vowels, they're the trickiest and the hardest part of our spelling system are the vowels. So we talked about the double O's. For puppy, it actually makes absolute sense. What we enjoy so much about their phonological awareness is that how they spell words makes more sense than how the words are spelled. So there is a doll looking for his puppy in India. And then she caught periods in the second reading. These periods are only put in by a student noticing the periods. And then she knows from the work that we do during our skill time about capitals coming after periods. So there you see with India and if. If he can't, apostrophes are not there, and we would not even bring it up. So what Kristen mentioned is nobody wants to see a piece of writing where everything, and this one, she didn't see it in this state. The yellow, I make a copy of everyone's writing before we go into the editing process. Because once it's edited, I'm not going to remember what the class filled with students. What did we look at? Because when I see a finished piece, it's different than the initial piece. So I first copy a piece. After editing process, I then look at that copy I have of her initial writing to the copy of the book when it's published. And that's when I go back through and do the yellow and red, because this is now my document for assessment. For a student, all they see is a piece as we are making edit corrections, and it goes into publishing. So what you see here is not how she would appear, would it appear to her. If he can't find him, he will call his pack. He is headed to the den. So you'll notice here that there was, forgot the word him, just got dropped out, but read it, and that's how she noticed it wasn't there anymore. Will did not have the double L, double consonant. It all makes such phonological sense.
So Mary Jo, when you're working with her, would you correct any of the handwriting? So it's interesting how
you just have to decide each time.
Yeah.
I did not correct any penmanship here at all. No,
And-
that penmanship is not the thing that I was looking at right now. This was her second book of the school year that she was writing. And we've only been in school a few weeks. And
that's what
become a very prolific writer. She's very excited about the writing process. So handwriting is a separate skill station that we do.
Yes.
And we really focus on it during that skill session. When they're doing their writing in the classroom, there is even that constant decision of when do you bring up number reversal, letter reversal, how often do you bring it up? Just like in our everyday life, there has to be awareness. What is your importance in the moment? It actually comes up more with numbers than letters, because with numbers, a 2 is so radically different than a 6 in quantity. So it comes up more often in numbers where you have to bring up reversals than letters. Right, because you can see here that she's not using the midline. Letters either below the midline or they're above a midline, and that is so very, very common. And all through the grades.
We want her to walk away feeling like a prolific writer. This is an
Right.
amazing story. This
Yes.
is so much work. And so if we were really to harp on, well, you wrote Den really neatly up here, and then you did it, it's just not the point.
Yeah.
And we do make time in class for them to practice handwriting. So it's just a different focus.
Yes. So as you go through here, you'll see all the different changes. Puppy was a word we worked on. And then what we do as the teachers is we take this editing then and put it into a spreadsheet. So I can tell at any one time, this is what I was focusing on in September and October with each student. It is different. And then I'm able to go back to that when we're doing editing, go, oh, remember we've talked about that sound, those R-controlled vowels. I can bring up the double consonant. In here, what was interesting is after she did this book, we were doing a lot of work with syllables, and we spoke about the double consonants. So it made more sense then after we had just done the focus on syllables. As Kristen was saying, very often when we're writing out a child is spelling a word, we'll put down lines. The lines will either represent the sound segments in a word or actual letters for the word, and then they fill them in. It helps give them a guidance, says, oh yes, I am looking for one more letter in that word. Otherwise, it is the sounds that they hear that are the strongest.
Another thing we do a lot with spelling is rhyming. That's incredibly helpful. If your child's really stuck on a word, let's think of something that rhymes with it.
And that's our opportunity to look at the different spelling patterns. So the poems, the classrooms do a poem a week, and people wonder, well, why are you doing these poems? And so many of the poems are old. It's a very easy, gentle way to have exposure to different words, and then we look at all the different spelling patterns for that same sound. And that's where you start getting expanding their awareness of spelling patterns for a same sound. So the kids know that rhyming, and we talk to them about what is our process. I really want students to be able to be aware of what do we bring to a spelling process when we as adults are trying to spell words. So I want to model that for them. And I'm always talking with the students about how I will use rhyming. What is a word I know that sounds like this word, and I know what that spelling pattern is, and then I incorporate it with new words. So I encourage you to do more of your self-talking aloud with children, whatever it is that you're working on. Otherwise, the process that we go through as adults to make decisions, they don't privy yet. And that's a very critical component of how do we achieve anything, is what is our own thought process. Was there more to, there's another section.
Yeah, Jay, can you move to that third?
Oops.
Oh.
Sorry.
There was another
Okay, oops.
page. Yeah. Oops.
Yeah.
There it is. Oh, so here it is. The doll pack was together. Now they were at ER, IR, AR. They all sound exactly the same. Now they were going to look, and we talked about the double O's for the baby doll. Together, they found the baby doll. So that word together, which she used twice, part of it got cut off up above, is a great example of a word that's very long, different syllables. Could I have sat down and said, okay, let's clap that out and do the different sound segments? But there were already other things that we were looking on here. So you always are deciding on what will your focus be. I celebrate that they do new words, take that risk. There's such a risk in writing. And we know that as adults, I think we just have to look at for ourselves, what's our comfort level with writing and where does it come from? People feel very exposed in their writing. And so I want children to be able to take the risks.
And when you look at this, you can see what she has command of. I mean, there's so many sight words, the, was, now, for, and it's important for us as teachers to look at this and kind of keep that in the back of our mind, what they do know, because like Mary Jo said, they're so in such a rush to get their ideas out. So with her, you can correct more things because you know that she does have command of these things, and maybe she was just in a hurry writing these things down.
And she's very hungry. She's at a great place to take in that information. She really wants it. And if you give in just those small pieces, it's enough to incorporate. Her story has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end.
Yeah.
It's a thought out story. So it's one of our longer books for the beginning of the school year. And I think she's probably has finished her third book. It's on to her fourth book now. And that's what we're mostly celebrating. I always say that their writing is such a great snapshot of who they are. If you can keep their writing from when they first begin writing, what Kristen showed you with that beginning scribbling and then just a couple letters that all make one sentence, is such a beautiful way of seeing how they have developed as writers. Because once they start getting into start incorporating all the conventions of writing as they become older students, it loses what I see as this young intimacy of their writing explorations. Then it's all on how did you express your meaning and essays. It's different, very different.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Julie, would you mind stepping in here and just what are some of the things that you're working on in that 1-2 classroom?
So it's a lot of what you're saying, using those first that we're hearing, and what do you hear? I mean, we're adding the punctuation with the in the poems, pointing it out. What are question marks? Why did they have this capital letter here? And the kids are starting to pick up, oh, it's a name, because it's like, it's in the middle of the sentence. So we do a lot with the poems. The kids are writing their feelings pages. It's usually they give somewhat of a prompt, but they have to finish that. And so we're seeing a lot of this type of thing that, we've been watching with Madeline's. It's just a little bit younger. And letter sounds are the big one. If we can get the first sound and then what's the last sound, what else do you hear in there? Then that's a biggie.
Yeah.
Letter sounds are what's most important. That's at your youngest ages. Until they have the letter sounds, writing is more kept to images, pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's important to realize how important reading is with their writing. I mean, that's how they develop that sense of storytelling, is by hearing stories. It also is really going to support their spelling. We've had parents very concerned over the years that we don't do spelling tests here. And we really believe that they are going to grow as spellers in a few different ways. One, by watching us model what we're writing. Anytime I'm writing something on the board or where they're dictating something to me and I'm recording, I'm always going through that process. What sound do I hear? What does this relate to? Is there anything that rhymes with it? I'm always showing those tools. But the thing that's really going to be so helpful more than any spelling test or modeling is them practicing reading. The more they see those words over and over and over again, it really begins to click for them.
Exposure is such a large part of it that I feel as adults we forget for how many decades we have been doing something and that we don't think about it. But for them, this is a very abstract world they're entering into. Yep. Symbols are absolutely abstract. That's why I enjoy looking at their handwriting, because what they're doing with their handwriting is they're really just copying an abstract image and trying to duplicate it. So there isn't that focus on keeping your pencil down, doing it as one line, starting at a certain point, looking at the image going, okay, how can I duplicate that by making it into 3 different parts that all overlap?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's where the focus instruction comes into play.
Jay, do you want to talk about editing with Celine? And then can you also mention the handouts that we sent as an attachment, Jay, and how you use those?
Right. Before, I did not understand this process of editing, working with Celine. I criticized her, right? So, but that kind of put her discouraged. She didn't want to write because whatever I do is wrong, and it's just so much editing on the paper. And after following this process, things have changed. Oh yeah, one example is one time we were working editing. I think I helped her fully spell a word, and then she was trying to read a story to grandma over FaceTime. But I noticed she was not able to read because that was a perfect spelling, but not at her level. So she did not know what that word was. That clicked me, said, oh gosh, what I'm doing was wrong. So after that, I only focus on, kind of like you guys mentioned, about celebrating her writing and only focus on the words that she already knew, and also I felt that it was at her level. Mm-hmm. So that made a difference. Right now, she could write me something every day. She could write me something. Like this morning, she just write me a full page of a story. And kind of like she get inspired more and motivated more by less criticize her.
Yes.
Right. She's a very strong poet. She has an amazing voice, poet. And that is, I think, very hard to cultivate. And you won't get it by squashing them. And that's where you said that you knew then what to enter into. When you sit down to edit, that editing different depending on what person you're sitting down with.
Yes. And the day,
Yeah, and right. Which is what you notice in this book that we had on the wild dogs is I did bring to her attention uppercase D that was in the middle of the word. I didn't care that it was uppercase, but I already knew from everything else she was doing that reversal was just, she wasn't looking at the time, or she was doing it as a small d and it just appears more as upper. So that's where you know when to bring something up to a student.
It's so we had here years ago, and we used to hang posters in the bathroom. For your reading pleasure. And I think it was a gardening poster on
I think
Ladybug.
it was the word there.
Yeah.
I think it was the word there. And the dad just was so unsettled that that use of the word there was spelled incorrectly. We're like, oh my goodness.
We laminated this poster. It was incredible. It had so much information. It was funny. I think the ladybugs had they were their own personalities, and all he could focus on was the misspelling of there. And so it was just a really good eye-opening experience for him. Taking a second look at that poster, like, what do you notice that they can do instead of being so offended that we hung up the incorrect spelling?
We're celebrating the incorrect spelling. Right. Yes.
Well, Kristen,
Yeah.
I also, you're talking about making the posters, and I love it when I see the kids go beyond the classroom. When it's something important to them, they've lost something and they need to let the school know, I lost my Pokemon card or whatever. They own it. And so many of the
hornet that was wanted for stinging. I think it was a $50 reward if you could bring that in, but
the save signs. I mean, in the youngest program, save is like the first word they learn because it's important. They need everybody to know what they want. And to me, that's the writing. I mean, the stories and everything is another form of it, but I love it when it moves into being personal for them.
Right.
Such purpose, writing for purpose. Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned, Kristen, is this can all read the book because it makes phonetic sense to them. They can read it.
So Jay, could you go to that last slide? And I just want to review just some tips. We really encourage you to support letter writing of all kinds. So the holidays are coming up, there's Santa letters, they're all losing teeth, letters to the tooth fairy. Have them help you make those grocery lists. Thank you cards, Christmas cards. We've had a lot of families. I've never been able to stick with it personally, but it's a good idea. The travel journals. I love that idea, especially if you guys are heading out for the holidays for a longer vacation. We've had students do daily recordings and include photos, and then they come back and they share that with us. So it's always great to see. It's like Julie said, anytime they can write with a purpose, and just let them practice it. Remember not to be overly critical of it. We're not focusing on correctness of the piece. The other important thing is to model, you know, when you're making that grocery list or your to-do list, sitting there and really sounding out the letters. And it, you know, it doesn't have to be inauthentic. Just, you know, I'm sitting down, I'm writing, this is what I'm doing. And it's just more thinking aloud instead of, you know, come over here, we're going to have a formal lesson on how to write the word eggs. It's just, you know, you're doing it, model. It's that self-talk that's so important to do with your child.
And to limit dictation.
Yes.
It's hard because quite often students want you to write it for them, but then they do get more focused on whether something is correct, and they lose their confidence in writing is all about taking a risk.
Yes.
For everyone, regardless of age. It's risk taking.
Yes. And it's so hard sometimes to not spell things for them, especially when you know it's a strange word that, you know, they're taking their best shot at it, but still can't get it right. But we really want to get away from that, because then they become dependent and they are not able to write as much. You know, I love to watch my own daughter write, and she's, you know, we don't spell things for her, and she will write page after page, and 70% of it is completely, but she's not stopping to ask constantly, how do I spell this? Or how, you know, she just, once you stop spelling things for children, it becomes more fluid. They are able to take more risks. And then they know there's a time when you will come back and you'll focus on, you know, editing a few things, but just for them to get their ideas out and become those fluent, prolific writers. And they get that way if it's always in the back of their head, am I doing this right?
Right. And that's where you'll see children stay. There are some children that will just use the same word. It's more onomatopoeias. They only do sound words in their writing. It's what they are comfortable right now with. Just recently, there was a boy, and he did this book. It was just pictures, a lot of pictures, very small pictures. And then in telling me the story, I did get him to go back and add like just 2 words to, you know, every other page. But what a difference it made.
Yes.
But he really needed that support to be able to do it.
Yes.
And then there are issues of when do we begin to become concerned that a child might have any type of processing difficulty going on, whether it's a visual, whether it's a hearing. And that does, I mean, we talk about the children quite a bit as educators. We're always exchanging notes about each child because we're able to work with so many of them. And there are times when we will become concerned, and that's when we'll speak to individual parents and say, I would really recommend, let's go have your child checked. And even for eye check, it's not going to your regular, you know, ophthalmologist that you might go to. There are ophthalmologists that just specialize in young children to see are they tracking correctly. So that's very important. And the other thing about hearing, that's why it's really important if we know that there's a child who's as a young child, had a lot of ear infections, they have tubes in their ears, what they hear is different. So when we say a word and we know it, when we're saying it, we end up stretching out the word so much for a child. And then how we say the word, I mean, I have a very strong accent, how we say the word is different than how the children will say the word. So as often as possible, we try to have the children say the words, but not all of them are enunciating the words correctly. And we do it in our own life. There are a very high volume of everyday words that we enunciate in a much lazier pattern. And as a result, we do not hear those letter sounds as distinctly. So we have to be aware of that. How are we saying the words? Julie, do you want to talk at all about the ball of physics, because we're doing it in the mornings and how that can help with the letter writing
So
and reading.
if you're not familiar with Bell of the Zex, it is a program using balls and bags to put rhythm inside the system. It's a different kind of rhythm than a musical rhythm. We don't want it to come from an outside source. We want it to come from the children, from inside them, which is part of the writing and the reading. You want that flow. So when we do these patterns, we are also crossing the midline, and they're interconnecting their right and left hemispheres. Your left side is your logic side. Your right side is the gestalt, more creative side. We want those letters from the side with the sounds from the right side to come together. So the kids go, oh, I know how to bounce the ball. But then I start making it more challenging. They need to, slow down, because a lot of times they're the kids who speak really fast. They're the kids who just kind of tumble through it. And if we can slow them down, they can move that over into writing or to reading and slow the whole system down. So we've been doing it, for about 10 minutes a morning. It's really fun to see the progress they're making. And so then on Friday we had a little extra time. And so I don't criticize them. I'll, point out what we need to do, but I was the model, and what am I doing wrong? And boy, they were on it. You're not holding the ball right. You're bouncing it too high. All the things that I want them to know, but I'm not going to point it out to them. They could point it out to me. So it's the same thing I with writing. We let them out there, but we model, the others, so we talk it through. And so it's really fun to see them grow and put those physical actions into their academics.
Yeah, it really teaches them that slowness and awareness and listening.
And the awareness of each other.
Yeah.
One of the big rules we have, because everybody's bouncing, a small ball, and soon they'll be bouncing too, is if that ball gets away from them, they have to stop, watch it roll, keep their eyes on it, so we're tracking with their eyes. When it stops, they can walk over and get it. And it's amazing how much calmer it is than everybody racing after their ball. The ball's rolling, they kick it, it rolls farther, it calms it back down. And they're really good about, don't go get the ball, that's so-and-so's ball. And they're taking responsibility for their materials and their actions. And it just carries over into everything we do.
Mm-hmm.
Kendra, I think you had a question about the sounds within words. The other thing about invented spelling is that I see it's what you just saw today with looking at the examples of children's writing. To me, it's as fundamental as crawling. And we forget so much. We want children to go from one place to this other place, whether it be in their physical, their academic, their social skills. And it's so important for us to realize that everything begins that you're a newbie to something, and then you're putting together those new forming skills as you're going along. And our language system is very much based on that. We brought up earlier spelling tests. I assume that most of us grew up with spelling tests, and all the research shows that it doesn't hold. You memorize something, but does not mean that you incorporate it into your everyday writing after that spelling test. What it shows is most of those words you will forget. And we've gone so many places in trying it with spelling. And just as spelling with any skill, there are some people it just makes incredible sense to. They are always going to be those very, very strong spellers. We're not all the same. I think we keep thinking that we all have to come out to that same level. And that's where we get into skills and exposure and use. Using something for a purpose and for meaning is what I have found stands the test of time. As when they use the words, they need the words. And you'll some of the stories, and there are people here that work with younger children, it's even in our verb speaking where children think the word adult is two words. It's an a-dolt. Or they see the word, all of a sudden it's one big word. And those are the things you'll get insights into when you're doing sitting down and looking at their writing, is they don't realize, I mean, that's a part of skill development, to saying a sentence in your normal speed and having children, young children, come up with how many words were in that sentence. Because we first have to realize what are words, and that's the very beginning. Those are some of the very first activities to do with language, is distinguishing words within a sentence and sounds. So Kendra, you had a question about sounds within a word. I think your speaker's off.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just typing it in the chat. So when we're helping them in the classroom and I can't give you a particular example because I can't remember what it was, but they were saying the word and they were saying it, when they were sounding it out, they were catching it, but when they were writing it down, they were like missing one of the sounds. Do we say the word with them slowly so they can hear it modeled as they're writing, or do we just let them say it and write it themselves? Like if we know that
I do say the word, because I know some of the children I'm working with, there's no way they're going to hear the sound with their own speech at that time.
Okay.
If it's a very distinct sound, there are sounds that are just not distinct. There's such a blend, they can't even tell the difference between those individual sounds.
Yeah.
And sometimes they've heard it wrong their whole lives, or they've said it wrong their whole lives. I wish I could think of examples, but so it is important to model it and sound it out.
Yeah, it was that word together. She was using a D for the TH sound. It sounds like a D. Sounds like a D. I just let it go. That's great.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
I want to say myself as a typical example. I started learning English in China. So how I learn English all by memorization. So my spelling is terrible. As now I'm working with Celine, because my husband tells us, just sound it out. I can't, because I did not learn that way. It was hard for me. And so I'm glad. So this sound it out can help Celine. Like I remember Mary Jo says, separate the syllables, because it's most important for us to know if you separate the syllables that they can say that word. It's more important than.
And we're all different learners. Some of us are not. I'm not an auditory learner. I'm a visual learner. So sounds can be much harder if auditory is not your strength. Any other, Tony, do you have any insights? No. Thank you. For me, the most important thing is to just encourage writing, to see all the students as writers, and the fact that you have things to share, and we do that either verbally or through writing. And there's such a joy in being able to share your stories with other people. And that's what writing allows us to do. And it keeps it. I always say that once you write a book, you've just made a photograph of yourself at a certain time of your life. So that's what children get very excited about, is that they know that now they have something concrete of who they are at this time.
Something laminated and bound. It's very exciting.
I told them that the book will outlive us.
Yes. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mama Bunch is getting in. Mary Jo, Chase says hello.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Chase.
Kristen says hi too, Chase.
Hi, Chase.
Everyone says hi.
Hi,
See you
Chase.
guys tomorrow. Bye, Kristen.
Bye.
Bye, you guys.
See you tomorrow or Thursday.
Yes.